Hey church, I hope you're doing well. If you don't mind, let's revisit a little scenario we visited last week, and let's return to that time when phones were telephones and that was all they did, and they had cords attached and there was no caller ID, and they were hooked either to a wall or mount on a desk, and if you wanted to talk to somebody you had to be on that phone and carry it around and have the cord drag wherever you wanted to go. Remember those days, or at least can you imagine them if you don't remember them? Well, now this week, as we've discussed our responses and how we used to answer the phone and how we do now with caller ID. This week, I want for us to imagine, how do we respond if we're in the middle of a mess? Back in the day, if you're in the middle of the mess and the phone rings, you had to know what you were going to do, especially if you were waiting for an important call. Can you picture it? The pasta is on the stove, the water is starting to bubble over, it's starting to little drip down the pan. You can hear the sizzling in the fire on the flame on the stove top. The smoke is coming out of the oven because the garlic bread has been in there too long. You forgot the meat for the meatballs, and the meatballs are what makes your spaghetti dinner, and you're having people over for your famous spaghetti dinner with meatballs, and the meatballs aren't there, so you sent your significant other out to go and get the meat for the meatballs so you can make them while the garlic bread is burning and the water's boiling over, and little Susie has a steamboat which has a bell, and she lost the bell, and she's saying, my bell, my bell, my bell, can you help me find my bell? And Johnny is jumping on the couch and he's playing Superman, and you've asked him a million times not to jump on the couch, especially since you had the pillows neatly arranged for the company that's coming over. The dog is barking and you're fearful that they're going to make another Spot, which is why they are named Spot in the first place, because they have this problem, and you're in the middle of a mess and the phone rings. How do you respond? Well, if you're waiting for that important call, you might say, everybody quiet, here it is. Hello, how may I help you? And then it's Nosy Nellie down the road, and she's calling because she's noticed the smoke billowing out of your window. She's peered and seen Johnny jumping on the couch, and she's like, can't you keep your kids under control? I gotta talk to you about Johnny and his action figures. I found them in my flower garden once again. You know how these flowers are so important to me. He cannot be playing Army in there. He's trampling my prize-winning petunias. You wouldn't have answered that call if you knew who it was, but since you were expecting an important call, you answered it. And then the line was busy for the important call. Oops. But the mess, how do you answer the call in the middle of the mess? It used to be that you had to answer one way or another. Now we are blessed. We have caller ID, and we can even set the ringtone to say who is calling, so we know if we even need to respond in the first place. Your pastor calls while the water's boiling over and the smoke's pouring out of the oven and the guests are showing up at the door and Johnny's jumping on the couch and Susie has lost the bell to her steamboat, and your significant other is out getting the meat for the meatballs, which will not be ready in time for the spaghetti, and you forgot all about dessert. Your pastor calls in the middle of that, and the ringtone on the phone goes, it's your pastor calling. Your pastor is calling. And you can just let that ring. Or perhaps your mom calls and you hear the music. Grandma got run over by a reindeer. Mom, I love you, but now's not the time to talk. We gotta let you go. And then when the call comes in that you've been waiting for, that one that's expected, the one that you need to answer, it goes, 911 emergency, this is the call. And you can say, everybody quiet. This is the one I wanted. You can respond to that call. We're blessed with caller ID, at least, in those situations. But the question remains, at least for us, but more importantly in this conversation, how do we answer God when God calls in the middle of a mess? When God calls and the pasta water is boiling over and the garlic bread is burning and on and on and on, when life is messy and chaotic, how do we respond then? Or what if our family is a mess and we have people at each other's throats and not getting along and on different pages about where life should go and how you should act and what you should do? How do we respond when our family situation is a mess and God calls then? That is the question we'll be looking at, and I hope that our answer is the same one that we have started to discuss last week, and that we're able to say, here I am, Hineni, I am yours. Hineni was that response that Abraham gave when God called him, and it's more than just a check, present, yep, accounted for, but it's that translates to here I am. Hineni means here I am in Hebrew. That's what it means in English. You figured that out. But it conveys more of a surrender, a submission, an offering to God, saying, here I am, Hineni, I am yours. Whatever you want, wherever you want, however you want, whenever you want, here I am, all of me. And that was the response that Abraham gave to God when God called him. And for Abraham, God called in a time that wasn't really particularly messy. I mean, there were some things for sure, but God had fulfilled his promise to him and Sarah. He had Isaac. Isaac was growing as a young boy. He was pleased with him. He loved him. He cared for him. Life was going well, and he could see God's hand on him. And so when God called Abraham in that season of life, when things were smooth, Abraham said, yeah, what is it that you want? And then he was put into a period of testing. Then he was put into a situation where, was he going to trust in God and believe in God and worship God, or was he going to cling to what God had given him? Was he going to allow God to have his son, or was he going to hold on to the promise for himself and not trust God when he called? Fortunately, we know that Abraham passed the test, that he was faithful and obedient to God, that he loved God more than anything else in this life, and that he surrendered to God. He meant it when he prayed, when he responded, Hineni. We know Isaac was spared, and that even as Isaac was about to be sacrificed, Abraham said, Hineni, here I am. Whatever you want, God, I am yours. And God provided. Abraham was called in a season where things were fairly clean. Some stuff, we'll mention some stuff, but it wasn't a super messy time. But that's not exactly the same way that our next person hears God call when he responds in the same way. Hineni, here I am, God. The person I'm talking about today is Jacob. Jacob. We remember Jacob, I hope. He is Abraham's grandson. But his life, when God called out his name, and when God said, hey, Jacob, and he responded, Hineni, here I am, wasn't quite so smooth and easy. In fact, it was much more messy and complicated and difficult than when Abraham initially responded. And I think we can start with Abraham as to where this mess unfolded. You see, Jacob was the son of Isaac, who was the son of Abraham, the one that walked with Abraham up the mountain, up Mount Moriah, the one who God spared and offered a ram instead. Isaac was Jacob's father, but Isaac wasn't the only son of Abraham. He was the son of the promise, the one that God would fulfill all of the blessings through. He was the one that God had promised and miraculously came through Sarah, but he was not Abraham's only offspring. If we remember the story of Abraham, prior to this, after he had been promised offspring and descendants, he and Sarah began to think, it's taken a while. God hasn't really come through yet, and maybe we need to help God out. And so Sarah and Abraham said, hey, why don't we just have Abraham get another wife, Hagar? And maybe Hagar can have a child since it's not working out so well with us. And that's what happened. Abraham took on Hagar as his wife. She bore him a son before Isaac named Ishmael. And Ishmael was an offspring of Abraham. But we know that as Ishmael grew, and especially after Isaac was born, there was contention. There were family problems. Sarah wasn't so happy that this was what had happened. Hagar got a little boastful in her having a son and Sarah not being able to. Sarah got a little jealous. And then when Isaac was born, she told Abraham that Ishmael's got to go. He's got to hit the road, Jack, because there's not room for him and for Isaac in the same household. And Abraham sends him away after spending time talking to God about it. But we know that as a result of that, Ishmael grows up and he's in opposition to his family. That the Bible says that he's opposed, that he will come against his family. So there's family tension there from Sarah and Abraham taking matters into their own hands and him having a child through another wife. Already family drama. But that's not even the whole of the story. It's the part that we focus on the most. But even after Sarah dies, after Isaac is born and spared, even after that, Abraham thinks, hey, I may as well get another wife. And he does so, and he ends up having 6 more sons. In Genesis chapter 25, we hear this, and starting in verse 1. Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Median, Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan was the father of Sheba and Dedan. The descendants of Dedan were the Asherites, the Letuzites, and the Lemonites. The sons of Midian were Epher, Hanok, Abida, Elada, and all these descendants of Keturah. Not so great with the names, but you get the idea. It wasn't just Ishmael and Isaac, it was Ishmael and Isaac and 6 other boys born from this third wife, Keturah. And then in verse 5 it says, Abraham left everything he owned to Isaac. Everything he owned to Isaac. But while he was still living, he gave gifts to the sons of his concubines, sent them away from his son Isaac to the land of the east. This is a messy family picture. You got Ishmael, who is, ostracized, sent away to the wilderness, is said to be, at odds with the rest of the family. And then you have 6 other boys who were given some gifts and sent out to the east. And then you have Isaac. Isaac sees all this, and whether he makes the conscious decision or not, I'm not too sure, but Isaac grows up into this turmoil, into this family mess, and he chooses a little simpler path. A wife. One wife. And I think that's pretty good advice to follow. But Isaac chooses a wife named Rebekah, who is found for him by the hand of God. A servant goes out. There's a whole neat story about how Rebekah is found and given to Isaac. And Isaac and Rebekah respect and love one another. And eventually, they too have children. Twins, twin boys, Esau and Jacob. Esau and Jacob. Esau came first. He was described to be hairy and red tone to his skin. Jacob came second. He was said to be holding on, grasping on to the heel of his older brother Esau as he came out, and he was smooth-skinned and fair. As it so happened, Isaac preferred Esau. Rebekah, his wife, preferred Jacob. So Isaac took a fairly, clean approach to marriage and children. He had a wife who had twin boys. He raised them and to know God and liked one a little more than the other. He preferred Esau more than Jacob because Esau went and hunted and did all of these things, and Jacob was more reserved and quiet. But Jacob is still born into this family where there's some mess involved, some tension involved. And then he adds his own into the mix, into the situation. One day, Esau was out, doing his thing, doing his stuff. He was hunting his food. He was out and about in the wilderness, and he was super tired. And when he came back, Jacob happened to be making some stew. And Esau was like, oh, I really want some stew. I'm so starving. I'm just famished. I can do nothing else. And Jacob was like, well, I'll give you some stew. You just give me your birthright. Simple trade. Bowl of stew, I get your birthright. The birthright was this right of the eldest, the right for extra in the line of the family, that the majority would go to the firstborn, that they would have extra privileges. And so Jacob traded Esau's birthright for a bowl of stew. After the fact, Esau might have questioned the wisdom in his trade. He might have felt a little duped, but that was part of what happened. And then later, as Isaac was getting older, Jacob tricked his dad into giving him his blessing. He prepared a goat. He clothed himself in stuff that made him feel furry like his brother. He made sure that he smelled like the outdoors, and he went to Isaac to have him pray for him and to give him his blessing in place of Esau. When Esau came back and saw that, he was not very happy. And so Jacob fled. He left the land that they were living in. He was fearful of his life, that his brother might kill him because he had taken his blessing and his birthright. Esau was incredibly upset with Jacob, and Jacob fled. He went away to another land. He went to find the land of his uncle or his family in a faraway place so that he might not be killed by his brother. And when he fled, when he left this mess, he found himself eventually in another mess. We've heard of that saying, out of the fryer into the, out of the frying pan into the fryer. I think that's how that one goes. But that was the idea. He left this mess of his brother and eventually he finds up in a mess over here. You see, because he met two people when he left. Well, more than two, but two main people groups. One, he met God, and that can be intimidating and scary, and the other was he met his future in-laws. And from someone who left an area that they grew up with to meet God and future in-laws, that's an intimidating thing, and it can be a bit messy from time to time. So Jacob left his land, and he left his people, he left his family, he left his brother because his brother wanted to kill him, and he left his parents, and he went to this land where on his journey he met God. And in the middle of this journey to this new place, he had a conversation with God, a vision from God where he saw angels descending up and down the ladder. We sing that song, "You're climbing Jacob's ladder." He met God there, and he said, if you provide for me, you'll be my God, and I'll follow you. It won't just be the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, but you'll also be the God of me, God of Jacob. I will serve and follow you. And that's what he did. He grew closer to God as he followed him to a new land. And when he arrived, he met and fell in love with whom he hoped would be his future wife, Rachel. Now, this family also added some complications. He agreed with the Rachel's dad to work for her hand for 7 years. And so he worked for 7 years, and on the day of their marriage, it must be kind of dark, intense. I'm guessing that another benefit of phones that we have now on cellular devices, at least they have flashlights, but then they didn't. And so he worked these 7 years. He was given his bride, and he woke up in the morning and it was the wrong girl. Laban had given his elder daughter first, Leah, and not fulfilled the promise to give Rachel. Jacob was obviously upset, was like, "Hey man, what's the deal?" And he was like, "Well, it's not our custom to give the younger one first, so I gave you Leah instead. But if you want to work another 7 years, you can have Rachel too." Jacob agreed. 14 years of work, he wound up with 2 wives. Now, much like his grandfather, Abraham, when people have multiple wives, it leads to some issues. For instance, Leah was able to bear children. Rachel was not. She was upset with the fact that she was unable to bear children, and so she gave permission to Jacob, or suggested to Jacob, "Why don't you marry my maidservant? Have children with her. They'll be like my children." And he did. He took her on, and they had children. And then Leah thought, well, Rachel did that, so I'll do that. And she gave Jacob her maidservant, and he had children with her, and Leah and Rachel, and messy. And when it was all said and done, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 sons of Jacob were the result. But life wasn't smooth. Life wasn't easy. The pot was boiling over, the garlic bread was burning, the dog was barking because it needed out. It was due to make a spot on the floor, the couch was being jumped upon, the steamboat's bell was missing, and the neighbor was butting in. Things were going bad in different areas. God was with Jacob. God blessed Jacob. Jacob's flocks multiplied, his families multiplied. He was provided for in ways that he couldn't have guessed or imagined. But his father-in-law was not happy with this. So he changed his wages, and he cheated Jacob multiple times of the things that he was deserving of. And he made it difficult and trying for Jacob and his family to live in that land. And in the context of all of that mess, of all of those family dynamics and the conflicts between them, and the in-laws and the outlaws, and all the in-betweens going on, and multiple wives and multiple children, and Jacob saying, I will follow you, God. In a dream, he hears God calls his name right in the middle of this mess. And his response, well, let's see that in Genesis 31. And we'll start in verse 10. In breeding season, I once had a dream in which I looked up and saw the male goats mating with the flock were streaked, speckled, or spotted. The angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob, Jacob. I answered, here I am. Hineni, whatever you want, God. My life is hectic. My wages have been changed. I've been cheated. I've been taken advantage of. I have more than one wife who do not always agree with each other, and they compete with one another. And I have all of these kids and all of this, and I wish to follow you. Here I am. Hineni, whatever you want. And God said, look up and see that all the male goats mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, or spotted, for I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar, and where you made a vow to me. I'm the God that met you on the journey, that met you on the road, where you worshipped and said that you will serve and follow me. I've seen the way that you've been mistreated. Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land. In the middle of this mess, God says, I've seen it all. I've been there with you. I know what you're going through. Now leave this situation and go back to your native land. Just so we're clear, and go back to your native land, it must have felt a little bit like you jumped out of the frying pan into the fryer, and now you're going back into the frying pan because Esau was still there. That brother that wanted to kill Jacob in the first place was still there. He was still going back to more family mess. Sure, he was leaving Laban and all those difficulties, but there was trial and tribulation ahead of him. More difficulties before him. He wasn't going to just, a bright and clear future. He was in the middle of the mess and headed towards what he perceived to be a mess. And yet, he went. He was sincere with his response. Here I am. I surrender. Whatever you want, God, I will follow. My hope is that we are able to do the same. Life will be messy. Sometimes it will be messy because of the things that we're engaged with. Other times it will be messy because of our family and the relationships that we have, that things will not go smoothly, that there will be misunderstanding and conflict and brother against brother and father against children and all of these things, that life can and will often be messy. And in the middle of all of that mess, my hope is that we can hear God call our name and that we will respond, Hineni, here I am. I surrender. That we'll hear God call our name and say to us, you know, I've seen the way you've been mistreated. I've seen the way you've been misunderstood. I've seen the way that you've been taken advantage of. But I'm that God that is your God. I'm that God who offered his son Jesus in place of Isaac, in place of anyone else. I'm that God who offered his son Jesus that you might have life. I see the mess you're in. Now come and continue to follow me. And maybe that will feel like we're just following God as the mess continues. Maybe it'll feel like we're still in that cauldron for a while, or maybe it will feel like we're jumping out of one and into another. But my hope is that we will be able to say with Jacob and Abraham, his grandfather before him, you are my God. You are the God of Abraham. You are the God of Isaac. You are the God of Jacob. You are the God of me. And whenever you call, my response is, here I am. I will go where you go. I will follow where you lead. I will answer when you call. I will do that which you ask me to do. Hineni, I am yours. I surrender. Friend, I don't know if you're in a mess right now. I pray that God will calm your storms, that he will see you through. But even more than that, I pray that you'll be able to hear the voice of God calling to you, and that you'll be able to respond, even in the middle of the mess. Hineni, here I am, Lord. I am yours. For when we are with God, that is the best place to be possible. The God who provides, the God who hears, the God who sees and understands and can fix our messes when we wait and follow him. Go now, and may that be your response to God this day, now and forevermore. Amen.